from PRX.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends beyond the binary, it's time for the podcaster that knows that there's nothing better at the right time of day than a cold dog nose, and nothing worse at the wrong time of day. And the reason I'm an expert at things like this is because I make Sleep With Me, the podcast, to put you to sleep. And that's it. Let's get on with the show. All right, everybody, it's time to talk about tonight's sponsor, Helix Sleep, and they've got some amazing deals coming up. You're going to hear about it at the end of this ad read, so do not miss out. I want you to right now to open up your phone. Just do it with me. I'm going to go to helixsleep.com/sleep, and if I were you, I wouldn't want to, I don't know what your relationship with your bed is right now. I've had a long-term relationship with my Helix mattress. It fits my needs, how I sleep. I sleep on my side, I sleep on my stomach, but now I'm sleeping more on my back, and I'm relocating, and unfortunately, I'm not in a position where I could ship my mattress because I have to move my stuff before I move, but that's okay. It means I get a new Helix, so I'm going to take the Helix quiz right now, helixsleep.com/sleep, 30 seconds, and you give, okay, one or two sleepers, one, okay, let me put in my email. Put in my name here, give a little bit of information. Okay, what size mattress am I considering? I got that down. All right. I don't know if are you taking this quiz with me at helixsleep.com/sleep? All right, toss. I guess I toss and turn. So I'm going to pick toss and turn. And what kind of firmness? Okay, I'm going to pick my firmness that fits my needs. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get yours, Okay, I'm going to talk about my back there, talk about temperature. All right, I got matched with my mattress. Oh, boy, and it's a different one than I have now just because I made a couple changes to how I sleep. So I'm going to check this out and think about it for my next Helix I'm going to be sleeping in. So take that Helix quiz. It's going to be coming right to your door, but most of all, it'll be a mattress that fits you, your needs, and how you sleep. And the best news is that Helix has amazing deals for Sleep With Me listeners, but only if you use our link. So go to helixsleep.com/sleep for 25% off site-wide during their extended Labor Day sale. That's helixsleep.com/sleep for 25% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. helixsleep.com/sleep. Thanks, everybody. Sleep With Me podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this episode today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. All right, everybody, it's Scoots here, and this message is going out to all-night listeners. Any all-night listeners, right? All-night listeners, everybody. Well, actually, it's just going out to you. Are you an all-night listener? But this message is for that one all-night listener who's listening to me and hear me right now. As you listen all night long, me and a bunch of other listeners are here rooting for you. Night after night, hour after hour, every single night, everything we put into the show. We're rooting for you to have that comfort. 8, 6, 7, 8, 4, 5, however many hours a night you listen. And I hope you're the one hearing me and listening to me right now because you get a chance to get even deeper with this. Like, do you want to root for somebody else that's an all-night listener like you? Do you want to root for them right now? Send them some comfort across the deep, dark night? Or do you want to send it to somebody else who listens differently than you? To root for a new listener? Or somebody that just lost someone? Or somebody that's getting ready to go back to school? Or somebody that just changed work schedules? Do you want to root for that listener? Or do you want to feel all those listeners rooting for you? Just like I talk about on the show. Sending their comfort to you across the deep, dark night? Or do you want to do both? Do you want to give out that comfort and receive some of it? And then do you want to root for one of those all-night listeners that's listening right now? If it's not you, do you want to root for someone else to support the show? Because we do need to, especially those all-night listeners,
You're one of the groups of super listeners that are going to make the difference in the future of Sleep With Me. So do you want to root for one of the other all-night listeners to support the show right now? Or do you want to hear all those listeners? Maybe you're the one that's listening to me, hearing me right now, and then you could feel all those other listeners. They know you've been meaning to support the show. They know you're an all-night listener, just like them. The podcast has changed your life. And you've just been putting off supporting the show or saying, I'll do it one day. Or, I got to cancel those 2 streaming services I don't really use. Feel all those people rooting for you to go to sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus. I'm rooting for you, too. But I'm rooting for every listener, right? And that's why I'm asking, because I want to keep making this podcast. I do not want this show behind a paywall. I want it out there for every super listener, every new listener, every situational listener, and for you. So, but if you're the one everybody's rooting for, don't wait. Go to sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus to support the show right now. Thanks. Oh, Mystery Bart. A lot of people help out on this show. Who are they?
Posty poster son sounds like an earful. Wrote the theme song. Edits episodes. Carl W. the legend. Also edits episodes. Ashley, Kenny, Scotty, Jennifer. Runner. Eric and the team at Astound are on the website. I am the Mystery Bart. I do the lullabies, yeah. I do commissions at jonathanmann.net. I'll write a song for you. Any reason at all. You can tell me the story and I'll make it personal. You see the kindness shine straight on through when the listeners form their own Facebook group. Keith, Stacy, Sarah, Julie, and Jennifer. These are your moderators. Get support your scooter on Patreon. Buy the merch and support the sponsors. You can find anything you want at sleepwithmepodcast.com. And we're so proud that we could dance. Rusty Biscuit, Lois, Anna like banana. Leah does the transcripts.
Thanks, Mystery Bard. And don't forget, the most comfortable way to listen to Sleep With Me is with sleep phones. You can get sleep phones at sleepwithmepodcast.com/sleep phones and use Sleep With Me for $5 off at checkout. Sleepwithmepodcast.com/sleep phones. Use Sleep With Me at checkout. What do you say we get on with the show?
Hey, all night tossing, turning, mind racing, trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep. Well, welcome. This is Sleep With Me, the podcast that puts you to sleep. We do it with a bedtime story. All you need to do is get in bed, turn out the lights, and press play. I'm going to do the rest. What I'm going to attempt to do is create a safe place where you could set aside whatever's keeping you awake, whether that's thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, emotions, travel, partners, unresolved conversations, whatever's keeping you awake. I'd like to take your mind off of that. And the way I'm going to do it is create, like I said, a safe place. And I'm going to earn the label safe place, or I'm going to try to. It's not like they got a Labelmaker, though now I know what I'm going to talk about in this intro. It's not like I got a Labelmaker, but then it just stuck out there that said safe place. It's much more. It really is one of the things in my life that actually is nuanced. One, I know I'm here to earn your trust. But it's more than that. It's about smoothing, and it is really creating a safe place does involve a lot of smoothing and patting down, and maintaining an area that is comfortable for both the orderlies, those who like order. The orderlies. That would be an inside joke about this. Scooch, you got to maintain your safe place, please. Please come to the safe place room. But that's for people that like order, people that don't like a little chaos, whatever, a safe place. It's just not about sticking a label on there. So I'm here to earn it. I'm here to try to create it, and it also involves some, the hand motion, like when you make a snowball, but you're working in something like clay, maybe not like Play-Doh. Well, here's a question unrelated to, because if I was going to make the safe place out of Play-Doh, it'd need to be sanded. I don't know if anybody ever sands Play-Doh, if that's possible. and you'd have to get it down to a fine grain, and then you'd have to rub it. Like I hear people, they say that's rubbed. That's, something rubbed wood or leather. And they say, oh boy, or metal. And I say, what are you rubbing that with? Because Jeepers Creepers, it looks good. I think that's what you do after you sand it. You do some sort of rubbing. Parts of the safe place will be buffed. But I'm really here to buffet you and, in a sense, and take your mind off whatever's keeping you awake. As I said, I'm going to send my voice across the deep, dark night. I'm going to use lulling, soothing, creaky, dulcet tones, pointless meanders. What else am I going to use? Tangents, go off topic, because I said, well, I'm going to talk about label makers, and then I started talking about rubbing wood or something. Dun-dun-dun. No, but really, I think that's what they call it. They say, oh, that's like hand rubbed. Like that's why it looks so good. It's got a patina. Ideally, if my safe place will have a patina of nice oils, like you say, well, that's even... It's been rubbed so good it has natural oils in it. You see, yeah, that's just to make it feel so good. We have all the woods here, too, not just cedar. We do have cedar and the other ones, all either sustainable or accidentally reclaimed. We're not reclaiming stuff we're not like the big money reclaimers. And, only woods that have drifted in, drifted to me. That's only reclaiming we're going to do. And where was I? Oh, I was in the middle of podcast intro. I got to reclaim this podcast intro, if you don't mind, before it turns to reclaimed water. So I'm going to try to take your mind off whatever's keeping you awake. If you're new here, thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. Structurally, what to expect. First 3 or 4 minutes of the show are business. That's how we keep a sleep podcast free. And ideally, all our archives free. So people that take action at the beginning of the show, what we say, or they just go to sleepwithmepodcast.com/sponsors. But that's how we keep the show free. That's 4 minutes. Thanks for sticking through that. Then we have an intro, which I've begun. And that's kind of like a show within a show. It sets the mood. It's different every time. The goal is the same every time. I just never achieve the goal, which is just simply... and briefly explain the podcast by demonstrating the method. So instead of it being simple or brief, it's meandering, a bit nonsensical. And ideally, you say, well, it was like an experience I have like 4 or 5 minutes after I laughed. Not the same as laughing, but you know how you feel like 4 or 5 minutes later? Like, it's kind of like that. Like, oh, I've laughed recently. Like, that's the podcast is for me. Like, kind of like the face you make when your feet touch a warm sidewalk, not a hot sidewalk. And you say, Yeah, that's what the intro tries to create. So that's the intro. It's about 12 minutes. Some people skip over it. Maybe and I forget the number, but a certain percentage of listeners go straight to the story. Timestamps in the show notes for that. And then there's a story. Like tonight, it'll be like a trending, like a meandering, one-off story, a bedtime story to kind of help you off to dreamland. And that'll be about 40 minutes, and we'll have some thank yous at the end. So all told, we'll be here about an hour. If you've listened to podcasts or audio before, or audios, this is different because you don't really need to listen to me. You don't have to pay me any bother, as most relatives and friends of mine say. Don't pay him any mind. Or that's what they'll say when I'm, when I finally achieve my goal of, instead of podcasting, just sitting in a rocking chair porch swing, and one of those nice porches, somewhere where the moderate temperature all the time, and I can just sit out there talking. Then I'll have achieved my dreams. And they'll say, oh, don't pay him any mind. He talks about nothing. I guess they record it and distribute it somewhere. I guess it would be if I traveled back in time. Or maybe that's my present, I guess. I guess that's, it's just what it's really like, a cartoon version of my present. So you don't really have to listen. You can kind of listen. You can turn me down and barely listen. You can reflectively listen, which means you can hear me, but your ears are kind of reflecting my words. And you can listen, whether it's if you say, geez, I just need something to listen to, someone to bring me some, moderate comfort. I'll be here. And I'll be here all the way to the end because I know there's listeners out there that can't sleep. And I'm here for you. But in some sense, I'm here for you, for you to optionally listen to me. But you're also under no pressure to fall asleep because I'll be here to the end to keep you company, to be your bore friend, your bore bud, your bore bae, your bore cuz, your bore bestie. I'll be here. And you could use any of those labels or none of them, just like a label maker. I don't know why a label maker popped in my head, but that's an interesting technology when you think about it, because there's only been, as far as I know, which is nothing, there's only been 2 gens of label makers. There's the plastic ones with the indentations, and then there seems to be some sort of printer one. And I don't want to, I guess I do live in an all or nothing world most of the time, because I was originally going to say, well, it looks like this was one of the first ones where, Gen 2 maybe not improved, because it doesn't seem like those Gen 2 printer style ones really do a good job of sticking. It constantly seems like they're falling off, where the Gen 1, the indentation, I think that was the technology. It was like a plastic strip and it would indent the letters in there. I never owned one of those. Maybe it's crimping, actually, or pressing, which I think creates an indentation. Those were always cool. And I think because, 1, I have dyslexia, so I don't do a good job spelling. 2, I don't really follow through on anything. And, you can only label so many things chaos if I did. Yeah, but it seems like some of my classmates had fun with those label makers, and I always liked that. Maybe I'll pick myself up an old school label maker. Label maker, make me a label. That could be a song for my parody musical. Yeah, maybe that's the story tonight. The Label Maker, the tale of the Label Maker. But then the second generation label makers are easier to read because they're usually in a nice, bold, easy to read font. Here's this thing. I'm no designer. I really know nothing about anything. But here's my gripes with the label makers, which I've never used. Usually I just will create columns on a piece of printer paper and then cut out little tiny squares. But there's I guess that's not a pro tip, but because it could but here's the thing. They don't really stick out. Like, 1, they don't do a good job of sticking. And maybe that's just something we've been taught to or maybe it's just me. I say, well, if there's a label, I'm not going to pay attention to it. And so my mind kind of blanks it out. And they said, well, why'd you do that? I said, you mean pull that lever? Because I wanted to see what it would do. Well, the label says do not pull. They say, oh, gee, I didn't even see it. I didn't notice. I guess I didn't pay attention to that. That said my roommate's dinner. Maybe you should put the label on the food itself, on the meatloaf. But yeah, I guess part of my brain is just trained. But those old school labels, it would catch my attention. Maybe because, and here's the thing, I've theorized this on other podcast episodes. And I think this is where the medium is a message. The medium's good if it's tactile, it's better at getting across the message. Because of the way those old school labels were, they were like the plastic was a little distressed, and it was, you could run your fingers on it, and it had some depth, and it caught the eye. And I think I was less likely maybe I was just as likely to ignore those, because those labels were probably popular when I was in school. I don't know, why? I guess because owning a label the label maker's kind of a rare, or it seemed more democratic, and that might just be a projection. Where these new labels, who would have thought I'd get on a soapbox and start labeling label makers? The man who labeled label makers, here I am talking about I'm labeling label makers, really, because I think the new ones are very institutional and I would say authoritative with their boldness. And I guess that's the part of me that has a problem with authority. I just ignore those labels. Where the other ones, I say, well, you're a little bit more like me, distressed and crimped. I never crimped my hair, but I wish I had ever had it long enough to try. And this podcast is a bit like that. I try to, even though this is just an audio show, I think something, I try to be tactile in the deep, dark night. And the only way I know how is to ramble, to give you something to hold on to give you something to kind of pay attention to. Instead of thinking about whatever's keeping you awake, you say, oh, yeah, I can picture that those old school label makers. Or maybe some of you that maybe are a little bit younger, you've just seen the fonts that look like the label makers. I don't know if they call that the label fonts. And maybe some of you work for I think there's only one company that I'm aware of that makes label makers. Maybe there's two. So now I just lost that group of listeners. They say, well, I work for the second largest label making company in the world, Scoots. Thanks. And I say, sorry about that. I only heard of the big one. Big labels. I mean, sometimes you stumble into stuff that's just too, there's too much there to goof around about. But yeah, I hope you label this podcast unknown or whatever. Give it a few tries, because all I'm here to help is to see if I can escort you, to keep you company while you drift off to sleep. Most reviewers say it takes 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll only ask for 2 tries. Give it a couple tries. See if it fits your sensibilities. See if it puts you to sleep. Because I work very hard. I've been there. That's why I make this show. And I really want to help. I strive and I yearn to help you fall asleep. So thanks again for coming by. And let's keep the show going.
If Sleep With Me has changed your life for the better, think about supporting the show at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus. All right, but this is Scoots. We're trying to reset and get the super listeners on this campaign for super listeners to support the show. And the thing is, it really does come down to, well, particularly if you are an all-night listener or you fall asleep fast and you're hearing me, I really do need your attention. But if you listen 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nights a week, if you've listened for longer than a year, if you've listened longer than 3 years, if the podcast has changed your life, I do need your attention. And here's the thing. Now we got options, right? I want everybody to be a participant in this. And I'll just run through the ways you could participate. And a lot of them you could do right now from the comfort of your own bedroom or wherever you are. And even if you're a new listener or a temporary listener or a situational listener or somebody just going through a hard time right now, you could participate too. But again, if you're an all-night listener or fall asleep fast, I really want you to lean into this, which is the first part of it is sending or thinking about sending your comfort across the deep, dark night to another listener. And maybe it starts with a super listener who listens just like you, but knowing they're out there somewhere in the world, or maybe it's a future super listener, somebody that's new, just like you were new. Can you send them comfort across the deep, dark night? You just barely smile for them and just think, I'm glad you're here. I hope this podcast can help you. Do you want to do that, right? Do you want to participate in that? Or are you in a place right now where you need that comfort to come into you? Do you want to receive it right now? Or just know that it's out there? Because I don't know if I'm in the receiving mood, right? But do you want to do that? Be like, man, there's other listeners. And this is true, by the way, that there's other listeners right now rooting for you. People that listen differently than the way you do, and people that are similar, whatever is keeping you awake or getting in the way of you getting the rest, or your listening style, that there's other listeners right now rooting for you. So those are 2 ways you could participate, or you could do both, right? You could send out some comfort and you could receive that comfort right now. Or you could alternate or whatever works for you. But I'd love it, just like I talk about in the intros, for you to be a little bit more of a part of that. And again, it's passive, right? But then we're also rooting, and maybe you could root for me together, that someone, and maybe it's you, is listening and hearing me right now, And the podcast has changed your life to a degree where you're paying attention. And maybe you're an all-night listener. The show will not go on without more all-night listeners and people fall asleep fast supporting the show. And you want to be that one that's like, man, I guess I just didn't hear you all those other times, or I wasn't really listening. And that's okay, because we're rooting for that one person, 1 out of 20 super listeners. So I don't know. Are you one of the 19 people who are rooting right now, or can you feel those 19 people rooting for you? You've been thinking about supporting the show. Maybe it's for the bonus content. Maybe it's because the podcast has changed your life, or maybe you're just curious to check it out. There's 19 other super listeners rooting for you to support the show right now, to be a hero, to be a heroine, to change the future of sleep with me. And believe me, I'm rooting for you because we need your support. If you're listening to me, if you're hearing me right now, and if you're that one person, please don't wait. You could support the show. You could get access to Sleep With Me Plus, which is built with super listeners in mind. It'll change the way you listen to the show because it's built with people. It's ad-free. It's amazing because we built it with super listeners in mind. And think about those 19 people that are rooting for you. And even if it's indirect gratitude, not only has the podcast changed your life, it's changed those 19 people's lives that are also rooting for you to support the show. So you could do all that at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus, sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus.
All right, hey everybody, it's Scoots here, and it's time for an occasional series we have. I think we usually do this about once a year, and I think it's been about a year. I don't know. I guess they do year by feel. It's been a while. I would assume we do this once a year, but I guess that's an assumption, so I hate to make an ask out of you, me, and Carole King, because this is I forgot what the series was called. Actually, it's been so long, I don't even remember what it's called, and that's the honest truth. But I'll explain to you what drives the series, not the theme. I don't know. There's a fancy word behind it, but it's what happened was Carole King, not Carole Kane, beloved singer and songstress, singer-songwriter, performer. So I love Carole King, but this is a different situation. Is it Carole King? Holy mackerel! I think it is. I was tempted to stop it, but I guess I got to live with my mistakes. I'm not perfect, and my memory is definitely not perfect. But I hope it's Carole King. Recently, she had a musical, and it's probably touring somewhere near you. So if I'm anywhere correct, make sure you go spend some money and help me make my amends to Carole King. But at some point, and we're going to take a quick explanation about how this works, or what inspired these occasional episodes. It'll be a meandering story of an adventure I had recently. Because of Carole King. And what happened was back in the day before iPhones, and I don't know how long ago that was, maybe 10, I don't know if it's 10 years or 12 years or 15 years, when they just had iPods, the white iPod that looked like it was the same size as a deck of cards, and it had the wheel. And you would keep songs on there and podcasts. Once Apple Podcasts or iTunes had podcasts, you could put your podcasts on there. It's great way to consume podcasts. Before that, what I did was I downloaded them, from podcast directory, and then I would put them on mini discs and listen to a mini disc player. But that's beside the point. So I had this iPod, and what I'd use the iPod was I had all my music on there. And then if I ran into somebody like a friend or a sibling, I'd say, hey, put some music on here for me. So I got like people that randomly would they never made a playlist, I don't think, but they would dump music on there too. And what it resulted was an iPod with a pretty eclectic collection of good tunes. And then at some point, the way that it was a self-contained hardware and software device, it didn't have a Wi-Fi, so it didn't automatically update. You would update it when you synced with iTunes, but it wasn't a device you synced often unless you want to put music on there or check if you're using it for a podcasts, you'd sync your podcast. But I think, I don't know. So the software updates were few and far between. Yeah, because, I guess all it did was really play songs and stuff and audio. But it had an algorithm, and it could tell, like, how often you played a song. And I don't think the algorithm paid attention to how long you played the song, just how often. In somewhere in the internal machinery or software of this device, these old iPods, according to me, this isn't based on fact, it's just my assumptions. The iPod would, like, say, oh, you like this type of music. And I do love Carole King. Yeah, but at some point, the iPod began to like, because I like to shuffle it, because I didn't know what was on there, and I didn't always listen to all the same music as my friends did, so it's cool to shuffle songs and say, holy cow, like, that's literally how I discovered, the Mountain Goats, that would be one example, or the Avid Brothers, and this was back when they were, not... the biggest thing since, like, whole wheat bread or whatever. Whatever you do, or, other groups with louder groups whose names I can't say in the podcast. But so I was big into shuffling. If I listen to music, I love random stuff. But at some point I became convinced that Carole King, now, at the time, I didn't know this, that she was like, she was a flourishing, functioning human. I thought maybe she had moved into the ether zone and found her way into my iPod. But what really happened is her influence is so strong in her sympathetic vibrations probably, that this iPod, the software, was so moved by her music that it constantly... I don't know, somehow her essence got into this podcast. They say ghost in the machine. And this was a case of that. So every time you shuffled a song, about every fifth song would be a Carole King song. And at some point I said, okay, let's just go with this. And then, this is the kind of thing they talk about when you're trying to get better, or, be more, you say, the more accepting you are, and the more you say yes, like a lot of times the tension resolves itself. And as soon as I started saying yes, Carole King, play me a song, then less Carole King songs came up. But I started to believe she was running the shuffle, and then I started to use that as my decision tree for all my major life decisions. And she really was dictating the soundtrack of my life. And she still does from time to time when I say, let's do some iPod shuffling. Now, luckily, I had the foresight because, this was before the old iPods. They weren't solid state. They were platter-based drives or whatever you call it, with a moving head. And what that means is that eventually the iPod stops working. But I had a way, I backed up this iPod, so... no concern about that. But so it was just recently that I was out and I was listening to music. And I guess I had this iPod for a long time in the history of my life because I was singing along with the song Froggy Wit and Courtin' and thinking about, I said, what is it like? I couldn't really pay attention to the lyrics because I kept thinking about Tom and Jerry. And the song was featured prominently in more than one episode of Tom and Jerry. And before there was Itchy and Scratchy, you might say, scoot your voice is itchy and scratchy. I say, well, it's here to calm you. It's like a sympathetic, it's like, I got it all locked in my voice so you can chill out. But before that, there was Tom and Jerry. They were a cat and a mouse that lived together. Sometime, whatever, they lived together. At one point, the song, instead of thinking about the lyrics to Froggy Went a Courtin', I was thinking about the song, and I was strolling down the street as I tend to do when I'm listening to letting Carole King. I said, "Let me get walking, Carole. You do the talking via shuffle." I put my life in the hands of fate. In this case, the oral essence of Carole King. I think I summarized that enough in the last 8 minutes, but that's part of me making a sleep podcast. But so I was singing Froggy Went a Courtin', And I didn't really know the lyrics. And I guess some of those older children's songs, I'm always like, what in the heck are they talking about? So I paused ostensibly to rewind or whatever, shuffle back, whatever the heck you do. I don't know, scroll wheel it or whatever they used to say. And see, like, what are the really lyrics to this Froggy Went a Courtin'? Should I be walking down the street singing Froggy Went a Courtin'? And he did, like, is he riding Cranbow? And I honestly didn't know. Like, so I said, okay, let me make sure before I, and when I did that, I stopped at this parking lot, not too far from where I live, that's behind, like a bunch of, there's a couple dim sum places and a couple other businesses. It's the back side of that. And I stopped there. I saw some motion out of the corner of my eye. And I kept letting Froggy Went a Courtin' play because I was more interested. What is that I saw? And then I started to head over to where the motion was. I said, is that a bird? And I saw something bird-like. It was red and white. And I know, from what little I know, there's like a famous woodpecker I think I saw it in 60 Minutes once. And then my good friend Charlie, he's a big bird watcher. And he also talks about these woodpeckers. And I said, I'm pretty sure that famous woodpecker's red and white, so I better keep an eye on it. And he said, is that a woodpecker? Because it was against the fence in this parking lot. And there's like brush in front of the fence, and it was an old wooden fence. And I said, what's that bird up to? And I started to approach it, and I said, it was moving like a bird. And it was doing something on the fence. I thought it was woodpecking. I mean, this would have been a fence pecker. I mean, if I had to nickname it, which I did, I said, what are you, fence pecker? You know, like I said, that might not even be technically wood, because it was like that kind of stuff they make pallets out of. I don't know if it's like real wood or like scrap wood. And right then, the Beastie Boys song kicked in, Brass Monkey. And I said, I thought about like when I didn't know what Brass Monkey was, which is a drink. And then I did. And I was like, thinking people are probably thinking I'm back in this corner of this parking lot sneaking a brass. I said, I wonder if you can even buy Brass Monkeys anymore. But then I guess I was talking out loud, and the thing looked at me, and it was not a bird. It was bird-shaped. It was red and white. And you're not going to believe this, but it was a label maker, and it looked like it was a label maker imitating either a woodpecker or one of those birds that dips its nose in the water, one of those perpetual motion machines that you need a battery for, or maybe nowadays you just use solar energy. You know what I'm talking about? It's got like some sort of water bulb in the bottom of it. My neighbors, where the house I was born in, they had a bunch of them in their house. And my parents used to send me over that house all the time. It was, I can't remember their last name, but it was just 3 adults and 1 young man who was much older than me. And I would go over to their house sometimes because they lived right next door to where I was born. And, you know, my parents could only handle me so many hours of the day. So they say, go play with our older neighbors. They seem to be more tolerant of you. And so I'd go stare at their perpetual motion machines because back then, you know, we didn't have on-demand stuff. It was the closest thing to screen time I could get. And I probably talked to those birds. But so this thing looked like it had that motion down, kind of. It was a little, but it was plastic. It was a label maker, because I saw the in an old school one at that, because I saw the circular wheel that I thought was like the crest or the crown of the bird. And, you know, like it had like 3 or 4 parts of plastic. Some were red and some were white. And then I noticed that it was trying to peel a label. At first I thought it was applying a label. I mean, I was stunned, and I was also, you know, singing along with Brass Monkey. And I mean, every once in a while I couldn't help but dance a little. So I said, what are you doing? And I mean, luckily I live in a state of mind that seeing a living, moving, well, presumably living, but a motion-based label maker, that doesn't surprise me. And I said, I said, what are you sticking? I said, what are you, some sort of automated label maker? And Labelmaker was a little testy. I said, what the friggin' heck do you think I'm doing? I'm peeling this label off. And I said, really? I said, you're taking, like you're a label maker, you're removing a label. And it said, yeah, a sailor went to sea. What do you think? And I said, a sailor went, I said, I guess I said, what era are you from? Never heard that phrase before. I don't know. I said, are you trying to put a label on or take a label off? It said, trying to get this label off. And I said, well, it's too bad you don't have opposable thumbs. And I said, here, let me help. And at first it was kind of like muttering to itself. And I said, no worries. I said, I'm actually pretty good at it. I have it, I said, it's just an advantage I have as a human, but I can't make labels. Even with the label maker, I've failed at making labels, printed labels, but I've never made them. And they said, did you make this label? And I said, no, I'm here to reclaim this label. And I said, well, that caught my curiosity. And I was like, reclaim your label maker reclaiming labels. And it said, exactly. I said, for what, to what end? And it said, none of your beeswax. And they said, you don't happen to know a butterfly named Bernie the Butterfly, do you? And you may have think you could never have take the glare of a label maker, but this label maker was glaring at me. And I said, interesting. And then I got my thumb off, and I said, what does this say? Let there be drums. And I said, who put a label on this fence that said, let there be drums? And the label maker said, does it matter? And I said, it matters to me because I said, and I got the label off, and I went to hand it to the label maker. That was presumptuous. And, I kind of, I can be antagonistic too. I said, you didn't really think this out, did you? And the label maker continued to stare. And I said, okay, I'll just keep it in my pocket. And I said, why don't you hop on my shoulder like a parrot? This could be interesting. And I said, I was just trying to figure out if that label was, wanted someone to play drums on the fence. How long has it been there? And label maker, it has that squeeze thing. So it kind of shrugged its shoulders. It shrugged its squeezer. And I said, okay. I said, and I said, I don't know. I said, maybe a fan of the Incredible Bongo Band has been by here, putting up labels, and maybe someone was playing. I said, you can't play bongos on the fence, can you? And the label, and I said, okay, so you're on a mission to reclaim labels. And I said, are you going to communicate? I said, that would be incredibly inefficient for you to communicate by printing out labels to answer me. I said, unless Jan Svankmajer was around or so. I said, is that who makes those movies? And they looked at me. I said, it's a good thing you can talk. I said, well, here's the thing. As strange as this may sound, in this circumstance, I said, I have to believe that Carole King, the beloved songstress, wanted me to encounter you and help you. So even though you're sitting on my shoulder like a sidekick, I'm really your sidekick. I'm here to help. Where do we go next? And the label maker kind of mumbled a thanks. And I said, don't worry. And I said, well, where are we headed? I said, we're on a mission to reclaim labels. Is that correct? And the label maker said, yeah. And I said, I don't really know. I've been looking for labels. This is the first one I've spotted in a while. And he said, so you're just I said, you're really determined. You're just walking around the neighborhood. He said, not walking, hopping, sometimes rolling. And also I got to make sure no humans spot me. And I said, well, it's good because at a distance you look like a woodpecker. But I said, you don't know where you're going, huh? And he said, no. And I said, you know who does? I said, I said, one, is this a quest for good or not good? And the label maker said, good for me. And I said, so is this some sort of profit related quest? And the label maker, and they said, well, as long as you're not going to use you're not going to nefariously use reused labels, reuse used labels. And I said, no, I'm going to sell them. I said, okay. I said, great. I said, Carole King probably I said, are you sure this won't help some other greater mission? And I don't know. I felt like the look the label maker gave me at that point, like maybe I was reading into it because there's only so many, it could spin its wheels. So you say, well, how many faces can a label maker make? And I said, well, how many characters are in the label maker? I don't know how many words are in the English letters are in the English language. 27. And then you get the pound sign, also known as a hashtag. I said a lot. So I said, picture that, and the label maker could express itself. So it made an expression, then it made it sound like. But I said, okay, and I hit my shuffle on my iPod. And it said, what did it say? And I started doing a little slow dance because I was feeling like a Moonlight Serenade, if I was at a Glenn Miller concert. And the label maker said, Steve Miller? And I said, no, don't date yourself, label maker. And the label maker, made a couple jokes at my expense about dating myself. And I said, you're quick on the uptake. But I said, Moonlight Serenade. He said, either Carole King wants me to dance on the sidewalks, or like where I usually like to dance, the aisles of a supermarket. And it just happened that not far from where we were was like one of the last old school, like independent grocers. I mean, it was a new independent grocer, but locally owned, like somewhere between like when it goes from a corner store to a grocery store, but independent. And I said, okay, let's get in there and let's dance in the aisles. And I said, I don't know if this is an IGA affiliated grocer. And I tried making grosser than a grocer jokes. And I said, if you're from that era, Steve Miller's second, when the second boom of popularity was in the 80s, I said, that's when those truly gross jokes were around too. And the label maker just switched to a question mark. I said, okie doke. I said, that's really a way to supplement. I said, you have you can communicate by words, and I said, you're like pre-emoji. I said, you're using it. I said, wow, so much I could learn from you. And the label maker said, get dancing, Glenn. And so I was doing the Moonlight Serenade into this independent grocery store. This is only a 4-aisle store. And I said, just so you know, I'm not taking any price labels because this is like an independent. I said, these people are counting on this store. I can't mess the prices up. And the label maker just said, we'll see how long for it. So there I was dancing and trying to decide what I was going to buy to be polite. But like I said, well, she said, usually anything I'd buy to be polite would be towards the front of the store, in their hostess section, in their soda section, or, in their candy section. And there's not much else at a grocery store. But I said, okay, I'm here to dance to the Moonlight Serenade. And then that song came to a close. And a song I was unfamiliar with came on, Sideways Tree by Keller Williams. And I said, what in the jam? And we were in the jam section. I said, I'm pretty sure it's a jam band song, Sideways Tree. And the label maker said, what do you mean? I said, there's a clue of where the next label we're going to reclaim. And I said, it's in the jams. I said, we're in the right place. Carole King knows what she's doing. And the label maker said, okay, I'll keep my whatever. I think it said it's numerals peeled, and it cracked me up. I said, "You're hilarious." They said, "Wouldn't it be your labels peeled? Like, could you peel off the?" And they said, "Well, we're almost there. Between the two of us, we have 40% of a joke." But I said, "Which jam comes from a sideways tree?" I said, "Strawberries grow on the ground. Grapes grow." I said, "I don't even know where grapes grow on a vine." They said, "What other? We got strawberries, strawberry." And we said, "Oh, those are jellies." He said, "These are jams." And he said, "Sideways tree. I guess that could be." I said, "It's probably grape jam." And there it was. Underneath the grape jam, I started moving the grape jam jars, and sitting on the metal shelf was a label, a green and white label, green plastic, white letters. And I said, I had this question earlier, and the Labelmaker said, "Shh, shh, shh." And they said, "Get peeling." And I said, okay. And I said, "Shouldn't I give some dramatic thing to this label?" And the Labelmaker said, "Just reclaim it." And I said, "It says, 'Got me wrong.'" He said, "What did the first label say? Brass monkey?" And the Labelmaker started laughing at that, or more of a chattering sound because of its limited ability to express itself. And so I peeled that label off. So we had that green label. I stuck it in my pocket, and I said, "Okay, I got to pull. I said, "I might as well buy a thing of jam." And then I said, "Nah, never mind." And then so I acted like I'd changed my mind, which I really did, because he said, "Well, at first I should buy a jar of jam." Then I said, "Well, I don't really want any jam." And then I said, I have to be honest with the store people too. And I said, "Also, I have a Labelmaker on my shoulder like a parrot, but they've seen me before." So I got to shopping, and I purchased some, items totaling about $5. And I said, "Hey, listen, I saw this label on the shelf back there. I was just going to take it. It says, 'You got me wrong.'" And actually the person said, "No, it says, 'Got me wrong.'" And I said, "Oh, yeah. I said, my Labelmaker's lonely." And it was strange. I was going to buy some grape jam, realized I already had some. Saw this label. I said, maybe my Labelmaker wants some company. And the person at the store said, "Okay, just you're paying in cash, right?" I said, "Yes." And I said, "No problem." And I said, "See you soon." And they said, "Yeah, keep on dancing, man." And I said, "Please," they said, "Does your Labelmaker have a name?" I said, awkward. Never asked for the Labelmaker's name. And as I tend to do, I just trusted Carole King, and she whipped out a holographic universe. And I said, he said, "Is that where you're from, Labelmaker, the holographic universe?" And the Labelmaker kind of said, "Get moving, come on." I said, "What?" I said, "Can I call you Betty?" Because the next song that came up was Foul Play. And the Labelmaker kind of gave me a nod. And I said, "Oh, Betty Carter. You're a Betty Carter fan, eh?" And the Labelmaker said, "No, it's a hint, foul play. Do you know what it means?" And I said, "I know exactly what it means, Betty." And they said, "You're lucky. I almost said my little Betty Pooh." And the Labelmaker said, "What does it mean?" I said, "Well, right down." I said, "We're not far from a park. It's got to be this softball fields at the park. It's an easy one." And this is like an older park too. So, I mean, it's been refurbed, but I don't spend a lot of time on the softball fields, or except when there's no one there, and I just run the bases solo. And the Labelmaker, I thought I was talking to you, the podcast listener, but I was also talking. I said I should just wear a mic to save me one step. But whatever, the Labelmaker said it's something like typical. So we headed over there because this softball, I don't know how long it's been there, but it has some little stands. And it's got fences that are the green paint chipping away. And then, it gets like a little bit sanded down and painted again. And so I headed over there, and the Labelmaker said, well, what's the next move? I said, foul play. I said, let's run the bases for a while. It helps me think. I said, I usually try to develop my optimistic side by running the bases and saying, we. And the Labelmaker says, usually people imagine I had to think that people, just hit a home run or something. And I said, sure. I said, if you want to do that. And I said, am I forced to run around the bases? I headed right down the right field line. And I said, we're heading into foul territory now. And the Labelmaker said, okay. And I said, keep your eyes open or whatever, however you view, I said, keep your labels peeled or don't peel your labels yet. I said, just keep, we got to find the label. So I started running up and down. And there's a lot of, where the right field line was, there was a gap of space and then wood to turn into really high fences so no one would hit it because it's a park in a city. So you don't want the balls bothering anybody that doesn't live on a softball field. And I said, the Labelmaker said, we're never going to find it. And I said, the two of us wouldn't, but with the help of Carole King, we shall. And the next song that came on was one by Missy Elliott, Get Your Freak On. And I got, Labelmaker, we both paused for a second. But I knew what to do, which was, I just got on all fours and started crawling. Because I said, that's kind of freaky for being in outfield, appropriate to kind of getting my freak on. And Labelmaker said, okay. So I was crawling around a little bit like a crab. And of course I caught a label right out of the right side of my eye. And it was, I don't know what the label looked like originally, but it turned into a color that wasn't quite maroon, or maybe it always was. Wouldn't describe it as a burgundy either. And it was so weathered that it almost had a milk running through it, like a burgundy with a dollop of milk in there and mixed up. And the Labelmaker said, what does it say? Because it was all one color, and it was against a green fence, but because it was burgundy and it was really low, it was hard to see. And I said, wouldn't it be nice? And the Labelmaker said, peel it off. I said, don't you want to contemplate its meaning? Because this has great meaning to me, this one. And the Labelmaker said, I prefer to just reclaim it. And I said, well, whose shoulder are you on? And the Labelmaker said, go ahead and peel it off and tell me your story of why this has meaning to you. And I said, well, this is one of the first, adult set of feelings I ever had for a film. A movie, a documentary, as a matter of fact. And I said, it still gives me the chills. This is one of these, foundational moments for me as a movie viewer. And the Labelmaker said, okay, I could tell, I can't. And I said, this is a really big deal to me. And it said, okay. And I said, can you actually acknowledge you're looking forward to hearing this? And it said, I'm a Labelmaker. My views, are pretty limited. And they said, well, this will help you. I said, just hear me out and pretend you're interested. And the Labelmaker said, gotcha. And I said, I don't know what year it was, but whatever year Roger and Me was on HBO, Michael Moore documentary about Flint, Michigan. And Labelmaker said, yeah, I heard about it in the news. I said, yeah, well, this was years before that. And there's a scene in the movie where this guy, whose name happens to be Ben Hamper, he wrote a book that one of my roommates gave to me called Riveted. Ben Hamper's talking about his life, he went to high school with Michael Moore, and he worked on a lot of the assembly lines at automotive plants. And he was talking about kind of the future for auto workers in Flint and stuff. And the Labelmaker said, "Can I stop you? Is this going to be a downer?" And I said, and at some point he started talking about the Beach Boys song, "Wouldn't It Be Nice?" and talking about the lyrics. And then I said, moments later, the documentary played the song against the backdrop of Flint, Michigan. And I said, it always gives me chills thinking about Ben Hamper's talking head, pointing out the lyrics of the song. It changed my life of how I view documentaries, of how it had a huge emotional impact on me, and really made me feel for, and connected me emotionally to the film and the experience of the people in the documentary in a very profound way. And then the Labelmaker said, "Where to next?" And it was Carole King that signaled us time to dance again, the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. And they said, "The dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy." He said, "I don't think she wants me to dance on this one. It's too obvious." And the Labelmaker, this time the Labelmaker was really like leaning in on my shoulder, just like you'd want a shoulder-based like being with consciousness and some intelligence. Like imagine if instead of a parrot, you had a thinking parrot on your shoulder and you could run ideas by it. Like, well, we're faced with a puzzle, the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. What do you think? And the parrot would hold one of its sets of whatever they could call it, feet or whatever, to its chin, to the bottom of its beak, and say, And the Labelmaker said, "Sugar plum. What's a sugar plum?" And I said, "I don't know," but I said, "I do know that there's sugar in ice cream." And I said, "There's like ubi ice cream." And I said, "There's other ones like that." I said, "Isn't one of those like a root or, and I think the Labelmaker said, "The plum's not a root." And I said, "It is a stone fruit, and this place is just a stone's throw away." And the Labelmaker said, "I guess." And I said, "It's worth investigating, and I'm buying." So we headed over there. And this was a local establishment, like another, a small business. They said we could be like an infomercial or something for local businesses if we were going to name them and get paid, but we're not. And I said, this place just moved and reopened. It's actually called Cookie Bar. So I did name it because I like it. And we went in there and he said, "Are you going to get the ubi ice cream?" And I said, "No." They said, "Not that I don't enjoy it," but I said, "There's other flavors I enjoy here. Cinnamon Toast Crunch." They said they also have Fruity Pebbles. But that one is it's only good to taste. I said, because I like a sugar cone. They said maybe in a cake cone. In Labelmaker, of course, I'd never had ice cream. I said, "What do you subsist on? Like the spiritual energy of Carole King, probably." They said, "It's just for my mission of reclaiming labels." And so I ordered ice cream, and then I had to look around the shop. And I said, and I noticed that their coolers were old school coolers. And I said, "Man, you got some old school coolers here, huh?" And the person working, was staring at the fact I had a label, like they were trying to figure out what my deal was, because they were 16 years old. And I said, "You've never seen a person with a Labelmaker on their shoulder, huh?" And the person actually had me. It was like they deadpanned me. They said, "Actually, there's somebody in here 10 minutes ago." And I thought to myself, what a fool I am. I'm the person chasing around the original person on a mission with a Labelmaker. My first reaction wasn't like, "Oh, that's funny." It was like, I'm the second place person on a Labelmaker treasure hunt. But then the Labelmaker kind of made a click noise, and the kid thought that it was like animatronic. So he said, oh, sorry, that's cool. And I started looking over this old school cooler that probably was in like an old school grocery store at some point. And that's when I saw it. It was like it was a label down at the right-hand corner. This one was bright red, and it said Ken's Polka Thing. And I said, okay. I said, what's a label? I said, interesting. It might have been an old 97 fan or could have been something else, but I peeled it off, put it in my pocket, double-checked ahead. I said, how many labels did we have originally? And I said, 1, 2. And I said, okay, I think I got everything. And then we had our ice cream. I offered it to Labelmaker, but of course the Labelmaker, I said, just taste it. And I said, you're starting to grow on me. And Labelmaker said, okay, let's keep going. And I said, okay. I said, hopefully this is the last label because I'm really running out of steam here. I'm going to be in, like I said, after I have ice cream, I usually have like a sugar crash and I get pouty. And I said, Carole King, what's next? And she said, I said, holy Melissa Etheridge, because she said, meet me in the back. And I said, okay, that's one to puzzle over, because this is probably, we already left the ice cream place, so it doesn't mean the back of the ice cream place. Meet me in the back. And we started walking. I said, back of what? Carole King. And I said, what do you think, Wendy, or whatever? I said, I forgot what I was nicknaming you, but my astute label maker. And the Labelmaker said, don't label me. And I said, it's good because I never sought to ask your name anyway. So until, the person at the grocery store asked, what do you go by? And I said, meet me in the back. And I said, okay, let's just keep walking and thinking. And I said, I've been wondering to myself the whole time why we're looking for stuff. Like why a label maker would be reclaiming labels and a mission endorsed by Carole King. And, I thought, by your rough attitude that you were, reselling these labels to rich tech people for thousands of dollars, like reclaimed labels for, reclaim label maker art or something. But now I realize the truth. And the label maker said, not yet. And I said, okay. And I go, I think I know where we're headed. And the label maker said, where? And I said, there's a record store next to a taqueria. And the taqueria has out back, but there's a hole in the fence that goes to the back of the record store. And I said, I can't think of any place that would have more likely, so I said, let's just go into the patio behind the taqueria. And then we climbed through the fence into the back of the record store. And because it was pretty inaccessible, like the grass was high, the door was metal and it wasn't like this back area got much use. There was like some milk crates back there. And we started looking around, but I said, maybe we're supposed to meet each other in the back, label maker. And I said, I think if I'm thinking with Carole King, because there's also a mix of podcasts on this iPod, that there was an Elvis Mitchell interview with Courtney Hunt, on the treatment. So I think we should talk too, like, person to person. Like, Elvis Mitchell really gets interested, and I like how excited he gets. And I think he just sounds cool. So I don't think I could ask you. I said, you can't make labels anymore, huh? And the label maker says, alas, I cannot. I made my last label years ago. And I said, what happened? And I said, they stopped making and I said, the raw material for your labels. And then the label maker said, yeah, get more or less. The actual, and I said, wow, And I said, no wonder. I said, so you're going to reclaim these labels and just run it through like I said, because there's no retirement home for label makers. And I said, this is mind-boggling. Like, I said, you're still fully functional. And I said, and you can still communicate. And I said, we could repurpose you. And the label maker said, you could, but who'd be willing to do that? And I said, well, I said, I can't imagine Carole King brought us together for that because I'm not good at, I said, I could take you apart, but I wouldn't be able to put you back together or figure out alternative means for you to print labels. But I got to think we're here for a reason. And then I hit shuffle because I didn't have, I don't have all the answers. And I said that to the label maker. And up onto my earbuds, or into my earbuds came, only he has the power to move me. And I said, well, I have the power to, I just knocked on the door. I said, well, let me just react to what Carole King's doing. And knocked on the back of the door, knocked a few times. And then the owner of the record store opened the door. And at first he was a little grouchy because he was taking a nap in the back office, which was against the door. And he said, what? And he said, are you the one from Craigslist? Why didn't you come through the front? And I said, you got your label. He goes, okay, let's check it out and see if he goes, I couldn't believe these boxes of label inserts I found. And then I thought to myself, ironically, I said, someone else is running around with an old label maker. And I said, how many boxes do you have? And he said, 3. And I said, okay. I said, my friend is the one that contacted you. He goes, yeah, I just found 2 of them. He goes, I had promised that one to you and your friend. He goes, I got 2 more. And I said, well, my friend would still want 1 that you promised him, but I'm going to take the other 2. I said, I'm here actually on behalf of Carole King. Well, not exactly. And he said, well, let's see if they fit. And we opened up these unopened packages of labels, I don't know what they called them because I was like blind with excitement. I was like, is this a synchronicity or just the power of Carole King? And I said, holy mackerel, 2 boxes, big boxes full. And we opened one up and we stuck it in the label maker and it fits. And I don't know if you know what joy looks like. And I know the term transcendent joy gets thrown around. But if a label maker could weep with transcendent joy, that's what this label maker was doing. For its purpose had been restored in some sense. And then, so I said, I'll take him. And then he said, okay, whatever. He said some ridiculous number, like 800. I said, oh, man, $800 for 2 boxes of vintage label maker labels. He said, yeah, these are the ones they stopped making. And he goes, that's what your friend agreed for $400. He goes, I'm giving you these 2 for $800. And I said, okay, that makes sense. And I looked at the label maker and I said, okay, how am I going to come up with $800? And they said, hey, and then he saw the labels. He goes, wait a second, you got those. He goes, what are those in your pocket? And I started pulling them out. And he said, holy cow, these are, he goes, the patina or whatever, he said, wow, these are great. And then it clicked again, the deep brilliance of Carole King. And he said, what are these? I said, well, they're for our project. I'm putting it together. It's not finished. Some vintage, these are, weathered, reclaimed labels. It's one of my things, one of the things I do. And he said, well, what are you going to use these for? I said, well, labeling stuff. They said, my label maker wants to live, to have an act 3. But I said, I said, another thing I do is reclaim labels, make art out of it. And he said, me too. And I said, well, it's more of a thing on my to-do list than actual something I do. Because then he started, what do you do? And I said, well, more of something I've been thinking about doing that I never got around to. And I said, because I'm too busy out adventuring with a label maker. And he said, huh. And I said, I mean, I could probably, I said, I was planning on charging top dollar because these are, real wild. He said, I can tell. I can see the quality of these labels they've seen many days. And I said, yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to trade them 2 boxes of labels for these labels, these reclaimed labels. He said, deal's done. He goes, this was found money anyway. And so I took the 2 boxes and I headed home. And I thought about, I said, Carole, and then I said, Carole, what do you think about this? And she played The Search by Sunvolt. And I said, okay, we've done our due diligence. The Search, and the label maker, let's be honest, the label maker moved in with me. And I weighed out, I counted out the spools of, potential labels, and I calculated, I did some calculations. So, maybe making 1 label a month for the next, into the future. And, maybe that'll be something you'll learn more about. Maybe not. Maybe I'll become a major label artist, majorly making art with labels, or maybe I get over labeling, but, just basically making a label maker happy, but really just assisting, the universe and making sure the label, the label maker they could. And we still reclaim labels when we can, because you want to forget your roots. That's what the label maker told me. Unnamed label maker, because it doesn't like to be labeled. So that's a tale of the reclaiming label maker. Good night.
All right, but Scoots here. This is your Tuck You In message, mostly for super listeners, though any listener that's listening right now, you could partake in this by, like, if you're a temporary listener, you're a new listener, you only listen from time to time. Remember that what I talk about in the intro, other listeners are rooting for your good night's sleep so you can receive that energy and comfort across the deep, dark night that other listeners are sending you. And you could send it out right now, right? You could send out your comfort or rooting for other people, even if they can't sleep, even if they're awake right now, that they have some comfort and relief, some companionship or some distraction in the deep, dark night. So you can receive or send any listener. You could do that. Now, with super listeners, would love it if you're, particularly if you're listening right now and you happen to be listening and hearing me, and you fall asleep fast, or you're an all-night listener, you're the 2 key demographics that literally the future of Sleep With Me will depend on. If any of you end up hearing me and listening to me more than are currently doing so, or if I just slowly get through to more people that fall asleep fast, people that listen all night long, and then any other super listeners, people that have been listening over 3 years, people that have been listening over a year, people that have been listening over 5 years, people that listen 4, 5, 6, 7 nights a week. You're the listeners I kind of need. Well, I mean, the reality is, like, if you're listening to me right now and hearing me, whether it's in this Tuck You In message, or before the podcast starts, or in the mid-roll of the podcast, the reality is you're like, and I think a lot of people dismiss this, but the stats back it up. Really, you're the one person listening and hearing me right now. And that's why I'm trying this new approach, because we still have to get through to people whose lives are made better by the podcast, that we need your support on Sleep With Me Plus. But it starts before that, right? And while I have to keep asking for support and keep pointing out how important it is if you value the podcast to support it back, and that Sleep With Me Plus was built with super listeners in mind, no ads, different versions of the show designed for people that fall asleep fast, people that listen all night long, people that have very specific favorites and like to build playlists of their favorites, people with particular tastes about the podcast of certain episodes, but not other styles of episodes, people that are super fans of the podcast, super listeners, people, and I don't know, or if you're hearing me and listening to me right now, are you a super listener? If not, just root for other listeners or be rooted for, or if you're curious, check out a trial of Sleep With Me Plus. But any super listener, there's 4 stages, I guess. Let me look at my notes here. Well, the whole thing I've been doing in the intros over the past few months and in the last minisode is that we're here rooting for other listeners, right? Or being rooted for in the deep, dark night. Because that's what the show's about, is like gentle caring, gentle relief at a distance, sending comfort across the deep, dark night to people that are out there, people just like you, or people a lot different than you, but that we all share something, right? And now is where I'm trying to deepen that conscious connection and choice in a multitude of ways. So each time you listen to the show now, you get this chance to participate in a passive way and think about who else is listening right now. Like, are you, because there's a strong possibility when I get to these messages that you might be the only one listening and paying attention right now, but maybe there are a couple other people listening and paying attention right now. And do they listen the same style as you? Are they struggling with sleep in the same way you struggle with, or is it different? And can you root for them? Maybe they're an all-night listener, or maybe they fall asleep fast, or maybe they're an occasional listener just going through a tough time. And you can decide, do you want to root for them? Do you want to send them comfort right now across the deep, dark night? And can you sense that they're out there rooting for you to fall asleep, or to have some relief, or to have a distraction and a friend in the deep, dark night? That they're bore friends with you, right? That not just me as the person that narrates this podcast, but that there's someone else out there hoping that your life is more manageable tomorrow, and ideally that you could be out there flourishing on a regular basis. And if you're a super listener, right, particularly, again, if you're an all-night listener, you listen multiple times a week, or you fall asleep fast, or you've been listening for years, maybe you're the one all of us are quietly rooting for to support the show, because we do need to reach that goal of 1,500 super listeners supporting the show back. And that's out of a large number of super listeners. But the thing is, most super listeners are like, no, so it's someone else will do it. Or I'll do it later. Well, right now, you could do it, right? You could root for another person. You could be rooted for. You could do both of those things. Or you could support the show, or you could root for someone else to support the show. Who is it out there that you're rooting for? Like, who is going to be that hero or heroine? And maybe they're hearing, maybe you're the one, you're hearing all the other listeners starting to root for you. Are you out there? Are you going to support the show? Maybe you support it because you want ad-free episodes. You're supporting it for yourself, and it helps other people. Or maybe you're supporting it because you listen all night long and it's just more convenient to support the show and listen all night long. Maybe you're going to support it because you want it to be there for you in 6 months or 12 months or 3 months from now. Maybe you're going to support it because you know the podcast makes your life better. And you hear me and you know I'm serious. You say, hey, we can't do this without especially all-night listeners and people that fall asleep fast, but all super listeners, a percentage of them supporting the show back. That's how we pay the bills. That's how we're able to be here. But maybe it's not you, but can you root for that person? But maybe it is. Can you feel all those listeners rooting for one another and then rooting for that one person out of 20, right? That's who we need, of super listeners. So are you those 19 people getting rooted for? That's pretty cool. It's cool enough. Or are you the person we're all rooting for to support the show? If you're hearing me and listening for me right now and you can hear that, it's like yeah. Rooting for you to support the show. Don't wait, right? That's the biggest thing I've been learning from this campaign, from the people that do end up supporting the show. They're like, yeah, I was tuning you out, or I was kind of passing on the message saying, I'll do it later. Somebody else will do it. I want to do it, but I don't know. How many of those listeners are rooting for you right now to overcome those small obstacles and support the show right now at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus? I know I'm rooting for you, but I'm rooting for every listener. That's why I'm here. That's why the show isn't behind a paywall. That's why I work so hard, and that's why I'm willing to put myself out here and kind of be... have other listeners have strong feelings about me asking directly, because you're important. And that's why I show up day after day, night after night. I love making the show because I love participating in this thing where I know what it feels like for me in the deep, dark night. You know what it feels like for you in the deep, dark night. And you know there's other people out there that share this with us. And in the end, that's really what it's about. So I don't know if you could feel that. And I don't know if you could send it or receive it. And sometimes you might need to receive that energy. Sometimes you might want to send it. But a lot of times it's just nice knowing it's there, at least for me, knowing that you're out there and the other listeners are out there too. So thank you so much for listening to the show. And if you decide the podcast has changed your life for the better, and you want to make sure it's like you want to be that person we're all rooting for, you could support the show right now at sleepwithmepodcast.com/plus. And then set up the bonus content tomorrow when you're more awake. Thanks.